Hello, my name is Gayle Alston. I'm the director of the RCI Training Center for Excellence at the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregiving in Americus, Georgia. I wanted to spend some time with you this morning talking about one of our signature programs, the Caring for You, Caring for Me program. I'd like to start, however, giving you some of the background of the Rosalind Carter Institute so you'll understand how we came to the development of this program. Back in 1987, when the Carters were returning back to Georgia after their time in Washington, the Georgia Southwestern State University wanted to honor Mrs. Carter by establishing an institute in her name. When they asked her what social issues she wanted to address, Mrs. Carter said that she wanted to do something for family caregivers. Now, Mrs. Carter had had personal experience with the challenges of family caregiving from her childhood. First, her father had had a debilitating disease that he passed away from, and then her grandfather came to live with her family until his death later in life. So she had seen the trials and the challenges that a family faces when they're caring for a loved one who's been ill. So she knew from personal experience, as this quote points out, that family caregiving can be very challenging. Now, 25 years later, the whole world is beginning to see that caregiving is quite possibly the hardest job in the world. It's taken the rest of the world a while to catch up with Mrs. Carter's vision. However, we are there now. Indeed, the world is facing a caregiver crisis. But way back in 1987, RCI was a pioneer in the field of caregiving. What I'm sharing with you here is a picture of our original CareNet. The CareNet was made up of professional caregivers, people like doctors, nurses, people who were providing medical assistance to people who were ill. The family caregivers that took care of those patients formed a coalition that came together to discuss what their mutual needs were and their mutual strengths. Now, we identified a lot of needs at that time, a lot of the challenges that family caregivers were facing. But when we started looking for what kind of solutions were out there, what kind of programs might be available for their caregivers, there was really nothing to be found. There was very limited, if any, research at that time for clinical trials or special solutions and programs to support caregivers. And there were certainly no random controlled trials or clinical trials of those programs. So what were we going to do? How were we going to address these issues that had been identified when there were really no solutions out in the field? We had to scratch our chin and think that over for a little while. So what we did was we started conducting our own research. We did a 1993 study that was conducted there at RCI. Then we reviewed what relevant information there was out in the field, and at that time I happened to be working as an intern at the Rosalind Carter Institute because I was in college at that time. And I remember the articles that we found weren't really speaking to family caregiving, but what they were talking about was the relationship between our professionals, the doctors and the nurses, and those family members who were coming into the clinics and the hospitals, how they were not really getting along, how they were not really working together. So the key issue at that time that was being talked about in the literature was the relationship between doctors and the patient's caregivers. There was also the opportunity to work with that CareNet that him had developed with the professional caregivers and the family caregivers to just sit around the table and talk about what are the needs. We held some focus groups, we interviewed people, we conducted our own research in the field. We sent out thousands of surveys by mail to doctors, nurses, clinics, hospitals. We also sent them out to any family caregivers that we were able to identify through those clinics and hospitals. After the surveys were completed and sent back into RCI, we went out and conducted face-to-face interviews with the professional caregivers and the family caregivers. And we asked them for their personal stories about what they were experiencing out there in the world and how they felt challenged and what things seemed to help them in the work they were doing, both as a professional and family caregiver. We held focus groups that held very intense discussions about what was needed and what might be helpful for our caregivers to bring them together to work better as a team and also to overcome the challenges that they were facing in the home and in the clinical setting. The next step, of course, was to test out those ideas and to develop a prototype of a program that might be helpful. Finally, we would fine-tune the programs that we're implementing, and we would come back with suggestions for improvements. So basically, you test it, you come back, you refine it, and then you go out and test it again. This is how we developed what we called an evidence-informed practice. Now, you've probably been hearing a lot about evidence-based practices. This was before we had any evidence-based practices to try out on our own. Therefore, we had to be guided by theory, by practitioner wisdom, the wisdom that we found from our professional caregivers and from our family caregivers. We did the qualitative studies. That's when we would test it, and then we'd ask for the feedback from the people who were going through the program. We wanted to know, was this information helpful to you? How could it be better presented? What can we do that would make a bigger impact in meeting your needs as a caregiver? That's what we call the qualitative study. We were studying the quality of what we were delivering. And finally, we developed a curriculum for the Caring for You, Caring for Me program. And that curriculum was accompanied by guidelines, not only on what content to deliver, but also how to deliver it. And that is how the Caring for You, Caring for Me program was born. This is a program that we're going to discuss in detail now. It was, as I said, evidence-informed, something that we put a lot of effort into to try to fine-tune it to the needs of the family caregivers. And it was new. It was something that wasn't being done at that point in time. So let's talk a little bit about the details of our Caring for You, Caring for Me program. Well, the broad objectives of the Caring for You, Caring for Me program were for both professional and family caregivers, and we wanted to give them information, that various topics related to what they had told us they needed more information about. And then we wanted to teach them stress management skills and problem-solving skills to help them address the strains and the burdens of caregiving. And finally, we were going to introduce them to the resources that would be available to them, because so many caregivers really did not know what kind of resources were available to them. And I have to admit, there were few and far between resources back in the early 90s. However, there were some resources that were available, and we wanted to make sure that the caregivers knew how to access them and then encourage them to access them. And those resources would have been available locally, at the community level, at the state level, and then also at the national level. Other objectives were that we had read about how the doctors and the family caregivers really, instead of coming together and supporting each other in caring for their patient and their loved one, they were kind of at odds with each other. The doctors really kind of thought like family caregivers were getting in the way, and the family caregivers were intimidated by the doctors. They were afraid to ask the questions, or they felt like if they did ask the questions, the doctors weren't really responding to them with the respect and understanding that they needed. So that communication problem between doctors and family caregivers was really a source of frustration, and it was a barrier to providing the best possible care to the care recipient, the patients, the loved one. We felt like the family caregiver and the professional caregiver really had common concerns and should have had common goals, which indeed they did. So we wanted to help them recognize that they should be working together, that they were a team. And then finally, we wanted to help family caregivers understand that they're not alone in what they're doing. Even today, many family caregivers believe that their experiences are unique to them. They feel all alone and isolated as they provide care for their loved one. And that's just not the case. Over and over and over again, we continue to hear how similar caregiver experiences are. Sure, there are things that make them very different. There are things that make each caregiving experience unique, but also overall, there are many similar experiences that caregivers can come together to discuss, to problem solve together, to share solutions. So Caring for You, Caring for Me was an opportunity to bring those family caregivers together to share that kind of information. Ultimately, what we wanted to do with Caring for You and Caring for Me was to increase those pleasant experiences that caregivers feel. You know, so many times, especially today, you will hear a lot of discussion around what is so hard about caregiving. In fact, I've shared that with you right here today, that it's the toughest job in the world. However, we should not minimize the positive aspects of family caregiving. Family caregivers have the opportunity to share experiences with their loved ones that they would never have otherwise. It brings them closer together. Oftentimes, family caregivers state that they enjoy their opportunity to give back to their loved one, whether it's their mother or father, or maybe it's their spouse, maybe they're caring for a sibling. The relationship that they share during those years of caregiving and that opportunity to show and demonstrate the love and support they feel for that care recipient becomes a treasure to them, something that they cherish for their entire lives. So Caring for You, Caring for Me wanted to help those family caregivers see beyond the challenges of caregiving and focus on those benefits and those rewards that are so rich in the caregiving experience. And of course, again, the secondary goal was that we wanted to bring the professional caregivers, the doctors and the nurses and the family caregivers together so they could learn different ways to communicate and different ways to work together to support that patient. So ultimately they would get the best possible care. So what does that look like when you're trying to achieve these goals? Well, first we really involved the family and professional caregivers. We wanted to bring them together face to face so that they could begin to identify how similar they are. We wanted to build a relationship so they could relate more easily to each other. And of course, we wanted to emphasize that cooperation, understanding, support, resourcefulness was something that would draw them together. Cooperation being perhaps the most important word here. And then appreciation of the respective knowledge and talents of both family and professional caregivers. You know, I like to share with my family caregivers that, you know, a doctor got his medical degree. He's certainly an expert in diseases and treatments and solutions and medical processes. However, a family caregiver is an expert on that patient. Nobody knows your loved one better than you. So as a family caregiver, you shouldn't let the expertise of the medical doctor overshadow your expertise on the person you care for. And that's why it's so critical that both the doctor and the family caregiver combine their expertise, his knowledge of the medical world, medical solutions, and the caregiver's knowledge of what that care recipient is experiencing and what benefits them most. It's that combination that's going to really support that care recipient through their illness and their treatment. Now, another thing about Caring for You, Caring for Me is that it's not just providing information. Anybody could just write a book with information, content. We want to change the behaviors of the family caregivers and the professional caregivers who participate in our Caring for You, Caring for Me program. We want to impact the family caregivers by teaching them that it's just as important to take care of themselves as it is to take care of the one that they're caring for. We also need to help family caregivers understanding that seeking assistance, asking for help, is not a negative thing. It's not something to be avoided. So many times family caregivers are afraid to show that they need help. They don't want to show that weakness. They don't want to be thought of as perhaps not loving their loved one as much or not being as strong as they should be. So they're reluctant to ask for the help that they need so desperately. So part of Caring for You, Caring Me is trying to get the family caregivers to view asking for help as a good thing, a positive thing, a thing a strong person would do to better prepare them and better support them in their caregiving. And then how they interact with their care recipient. Oftentimes family caregivers will be exhausted. They're not getting the rest they need. They're suffering from isolation. A lot of things happen, and that can build into resentment. That sometimes becomes, they'll demonstrate impatience with their loved one at a time when they really don't want to do that, but that's just an offshoot of how exhausted they are. So we try to help them understand better ways to interact with their loved ones to minimize that resentment and exhaustion that they might be feeling. And finally, of course, we're all about teaching our family caregivers and our professional caregivers about how to communicate better with each other. So now the nuts and bolts of our Caring for You, Caring for Me program are this. We have 5 modules, 5 classes. Each class has about 2 hours of content. We like to ask our program leaders to set aside about 2 hours and 15 minutes, because right in the middle of those 2 hours, we're going to take a 15-minute break in each class. We like interactive classes, and that means that we give a speech, we give a lecture, we give out information, and then we involve the people who are attending the class in different activities that helps them exercise, helps them demonstrate that they understand the information they've just been given. And of course, we're also all about, it's designed to help the family and professional caregivers develop skills and relationships that will be beneficial to them as well as the caregiver. Now, some people say, well, why not just give lectures? Why are you so intent on having these interactive activities? But research has shown us, and I'll just read this out loud to you, that when you're teaching somebody, people will learn 10% of what we read, we retain 20% of what we hear, 30% of what we see, 50% of what we see and hear together, 80% of what we say. So having people repeat information out loud ups that to 80%, but finally 90% of what we say whilst we do it. So we give them information, we give them activities to show that they understand that information, and through acting out these activities, they're actually going to retain 90% of what they learn, as opposed to the 10% or the 20% of what they would have retained if we just gave them the information and then sent them on their way. Another interesting aspect of our Caring for You, Caring for Me program is there's flexibility involved. Many times people think if you're working with an evidence-informed or an evidence-based program, then it's very locked-in structure. And indeed, there's some truth to that, because protocols should be respected. Key components of an evidence-informed and evidence-based program should be respected. That's, after all, is what makes them impactful. That's what makes them work, what makes them deliver the proven results that we're looking for. However, there are some things that you can have some flexibility in. I mentioned that there are 5 classes, each 1 or 2 hours each. Some people will hold those 5 classes, 1 class a week over 5 weeks. But sometimes that's difficult depending on the target population that you're serving, the people who are attending your classes. So we give people the opportunity to, you may hold a day-long session where you cover all 5 modules in one day. Or you may decide to have 1 session a day, 5 days in a row. Any number. I mean, I could sit here all day and share with you the different kinds of combinations. But the delivery format, structure of the program really depends on the agency, the program leaders, and the people who are attending the classes. You have that flexibility. Now we're going to talk about the content that we have in our Caring for You, Caring for Me. In Module 1, we talk about what it means to be a caregiver. You know, so many times, up until recently really, when people were, when we talked about caregiving and being a caregiver, very few people really understood what we meant by that. In fact, even today, sometimes people will not really want to call themselves a caregiver. They'll say, I'm just being a good daughter, or I'm just acting like a husband. I'm taking care of my wife. They don't attach that label caregiver. So in our first session in Module 1, Class 1, we really get into what it means to be a caregiver, not only what the label means, but also some of the different aspects of caregiving and what that means in your life and how it's affecting you as a person, an individual, outside of your caregiving role. Module 2 is taking care of yourself. I mentioned earlier how important it is for caregivers to learn to set that time aside to take care of themselves. And I'll be getting into each of these modules in a little more depth later. Module 3, building cooperative relationships, back to really wanting those professional caregivers and the family caregivers to learn how to work together to support each other, and more importantly, to take excellent care of the patient and the loved one. Module 4 is preventing and solving problems. You know, we're not necessarily born knowing how to problem solve. Some people have an innate skill. Some people are just good at problem solving. But other people just kind of, you know, hope for the best and make a stab at it. But there are very systematic ways to go about solving a problem. So that's something that they talk about in Module 4. Module 5 is where we get to those resources, the local resources, the regional resources. We not only help them understand what resources are available, but we help them understand how to access those resources. Now I'll get in a little more depth in each of these modules, a little bit more than I have. So Module 1 is what it means to be a caregiver. We spend a lot of time going around the room, letting people introduce themselves and kind of getting to know each other. And we help them develop a broader understanding of caregiving. We kind of want them to be looking at it through the other person's lens. This gives those professional caregivers in the room to have a better understanding of what the family caregivers are experiencing and what their challenges are and what their value is and how they can support the professional caregiver in doing their job. And then the family caregiver gets to hear about what it's like to be a doctor or a nurse or a certified nursing assistant. They get a better understanding of what that person is dealing with day in and day out and the challenges associated with that piece. And it's this mutual understanding of what each group is experiencing that really starts building that relationship, that cooperative relationship that we're looking to build. So they're sharing their experiences in a face-to-face, person-to-person classroom setting that's really the foundation of building that cooperative relationship. We do promote an atmosphere of openness, and again, we're helping people understand they're not alone. As you go around the room and the family caregivers are sharing their experiences, you can see the light bulbs go off over the heads of them and they go, oh, someone else has experienced the same thing I have, and you'll see them nodding their heads. Yes, yes, I know what that's like. It's a wonderful thing to experience and to see when you have people that are finally realizing, I'm not alone. Other people have these things. And another thing is they get to share the solutions that they've found. It's amazing. Family caregivers are just like a treasure chest of solutions that they've come up with their own. And when they get in a room and they get the opportunity to share that, it's a beautiful thing. And it's very strengthening. It's very encouraging. So that first module, that first class, really starts building this classroom of people as comrades that are going to support each other. Module 2 is taking care of yourself. The first thing to do is really figure out what's going on with each caregiver. How well are you taking care of yourself? You know, it's funny when you're talking to family caregivers, and first of all, if you stop, they're used to people coming up to them and say, well, how's your mother, or how's your husband doing, or you know, how's your loved one doing? Rarely does someone come up to a family caregiver and say, how are you doing? And oftentimes when I'm giving talks out in the community and talking to the general population, I'll encourage people to do that. Next time you come up to a family caregiver, just go up and ask them, well, how are you doing? And I think you'll be surprised how oftentimes kind of they a little set aback. They're not used to that question. And then you'll oftentimes see tears form in their eyes because they're not used to being asked how they're doing. They're not even used to thinking about how they're doing. And that kind of opens the door to help them realize, you know what, you matter too. Your loved one matters. It's a wonderful thing that you're taking care of your loved one, but don't forget to take care of yourself. Indeed, if they forget to take care of themselves, there's some severe repercussions for doing that. They're going to suffer physically. They're going to have physical health problems. They may have emotional problems. Certainly depression is not unusual. It's quite common among family caregivers because they're totally shut down on what they used to do to keep themselves happy and productive and how they define themselves in the world around them. They've let go of who they used to be, and they've taken on this mantle of family caregiver, and that completely defines them. And when you let that small piece of your reality define you, then you become a one-dimensional person, and that can really impact your health in every possible way. And finally, Module 2 is going to talk about ways to improve their self-care. Lots of exercises and strategies to help them get back to taking care of themselves. Now, what I've learned in working with family caregivers and what I've learned from being a family caregiver is you can oftentimes tell them all sorts of reasons why they should take care of themselves, but the most powerful reason for telling them they should take care of themselves is, what will happen to your loved one if your health becomes so bad that you can no longer care for them? And when you connect their self-care with their ability to provide care, then you have their attention. Then they're ready to listen for the certain ways, certain things and techniques and strategies that they can use to take better care of themselves. And you're halfway home when you get their attention that way. Our Module 3 is building cooperative relationships. And this is getting back to just really trying to establish that care team of the professional caregiver and the family caregiver. We've already kind of set that foundation when we shared our experiences, but this goes even a little deeper, and it really digs into what those experiences are for professional and family caregivers. And it gives them an opportunity to tell each other what about their relationship in the past or their communication in the past have been helpful and what's been unhelpful. And that's rather bold to stand face to face with someone and say, when you did this, or when a doctor does this, I don't find that very helpful. And when the doctor goes to the family caregiver and say, well, when you do this, I don't find that very helpful. So it takes a certain amount of comfort. Hopefully by the third class, the people are feeling more comfortable with each other and can have those kind of open and honest exchanges. But it also opens up the possibility of solving those unhelpful situations and increasing the number of helpful situations. And they offer advice to one another so that they can improve their ongoing communication and collaboration. Very important module. I guess all 5 modules are pretty important, but I get very excited about this one because I've seen the difference it can make in the lives of both professional and family caregivers. When that professional caregiver finally gets it, that the family caregiver can be such a benefit to them, and when they work together, it's a beautiful thing to behold, I'll have to tell you. Module 4 is about preventing and solving problems. You know, I already mentioned that not everybody's born knowing how to solve a problem. There's a process that can be involved. It's very structured. You go through step by step by step, and that gives you the best possibility to come up with a successful and effective solution to the problems that family caregivers face. They start out, they give you the model, and then the class works together on a case study. They present a caregiver situation and has everybody talk about, you know, how would we solve that, so that as a group they go through the problem-solving process. And then they divide into small groups and pick individual problems that group decides to work on. It could be that one caregiver will say something like, well, you know, I have such a problem with my mother. She doesn't want to eat anymore. She just isn't interested in eating anymore. And I had that problem too. And they go through the problem-solving process, the methodology about each step, about how that's done, and then they come up with some strategies and some solutions together. It's very empowering. We definitely believe in empowering our caregivers so that they not only will be able to deal with what's ahead of them today when we're there to help support them, but also they're empowered to be able to handle that problem solving after they get done with the class, because you know new problems are always going to arise. And if you have a good idea of how to problem solve, then you have the power to continue to apply that process even after you're long past being in the class. And finally, Module 5 is accessing and developing resources. Accessing and developing resources. Now, there are some barriers that caregivers might experience to resources. You know, off the top of my head, I can think of the barriers to even attending a Caring for You, Caring for Me class. They might not be able to leave their loved one alone, so they have to make arrangements to have someone be there. Transportation is oftentimes a barrier. Sometimes people will have a certain income level, and so they're not eligible for certain services. But this is an opportunity for people to start brainstorming around that problem. If you have barriers to accessing resources, what can we do to help you overcome those barriers? Or how can you learn to problem solve around those barriers so that you will be able to use the resources that are available? During this module, we would ask all of our program leaders to have done their research beforehand and bring to this module whatever local resources that are specific to their location. Oftentimes people who are leading the Caring for You, Caring for Me class will bring people from the resource agencies to give a short speech about what they can offer. And even at the end of the class, they may be able to sign up some of the caregivers to start immediately accessing those resources. So it's a great ending to our 5-module program, and it's a good next step because the caregivers will leave that program knowing what they're going to do next to improve their caregiving experience. You know, research tells us that doctors are the source that most people go to seeking information about resources. Unfortunately, research also tells us that doctors don't know a whole lot about local resources. They really depend on the agencies to come to them and let them know what resources are available. And we all know how busy doctors are. It's hard for them to spend the time really hunting down what resources their patients might need. So Caring for You, Caring for Me is an opportunity to educate doctors so then they can take that information back to their offices and share it with their caregivers and their patients. And also the caregivers that are in place in those classes will then have a much better idea of what's right in their neighborhood, what's available to them right now. Now, we talked about Caring for You, Caring for Me being an evidence-informed program. And when we talk about evidence-informed, remember we talked about qualitative research, but there's also some quantitative research that's affiliated with our Caring for You, Caring for Me program. We have our participants complete a pre-workshop questionnaire prior to that first class. In that questionnaire, we get some demographic information, but we also question them about what do you consider your health to be right now, and when was the last time you went to a doctor, and how confident are you in your ability to take care of your loved one. It's a list of those types of questions just to get a snapshot of where they are as a caregiver prior to the class. After they've attended the 5 modules of Caring for You, Caring for Me, we come back and ask them those same questions. And we're happy to report that from that data, we have found that Caring for You, Caring for Me does deliver very positive outcomes for the caregivers that attend our classes. We see an increase in self-reported health. So even though we're not taking like blood pressure and things like that, they're telling us that after attending these 5 classes, they feel better. They feel like they're practicing the techniques that they've learned for self-care, and the result of that is that they feel healthier. They also have seen an increase in confidence that they will take better care of themselves. You know, it's one thing to say that I know how to take care of myself. It's another thing to say I'm going to take care, I am confident that I will take care of myself. That's an important data point for us to be gathering. There's indication that there's improved communications between the family caregivers and the healthcare providers. That's a big one because remember, that's one of our major goals for Caring for You, Caring for Me. So we're very pleased to see that the data supports that indeed the program is doing exactly what we wanted it to. And then finally, we've seen increased confidence in relating with healthcare providers. Now, it's one thing to feel like you're communicating with them. It's another thing to feel confident in the importance of the role you play in relationship to the importance of a doctor. You know, so many of us are intimidated by doctors. So the fact that we're helping our family caregivers feel confident that they can speak to the doctor as their expert on their family member, and also ask those questions and expect to be treated with respect, I think that we've really made an important adjustment there. And we're very proud of these outcomes. Now, it's one thing to develop this wonderful 5-module program, and it's wonderful to see those outcome measures, but now what? We've developed this intervention, the Caring for You, Caring for Me intervention, but how are we going to deliver that intervention to caregivers all around the country? You know, the Rose and Carter Institute is very small staff. We can't be everywhere all the time teaching family caregivers these classes. So we had to come up with a way that we would be able to go to scale so that we could not only be providing classes to family and professional caregivers, but also training the trainers so that then they could multiply and be doing more and more classes out around the country and indeed internationally. So we developed the program leader guide and started and just put it out there. What we thought would happen would be that our program leaders would then pick up the guide. I'll show you. This is the English version. And remember I said that we wanted to disseminate internationally? This is the Korean version of the Caring for You, Caring for Me guide. When we developed the guide, it was really meant to be someone could just pick it up and take it and start holding classes. Interesting thing happened. People started calling the Rosalind Carter Institute saying, you know, the guide's good, we like the guide, but we need a little more instruction on how to deliver this. So then we had to go back to the drawing board and really devise a program leader training curriculum, which we began about 3 years ago delivering. That's what people can come to the Rose and Carter Institute, or we will go to their agency and we will train a number of program leaders. And then those program leaders go out into the community and have classes for the family caregivers. And in doing so, we've managed to implement Caring for You, Caring for Me, again, all around the country, the United States, and even some international locations such as Seoul, Korea. Of course, funding is always an issue about going to scale because it costs money. There's no way around that. So seeking the funding and finding agencies that have been able to find the funding to hold the classes and provide this valuable service to caregivers has been challenging, but not insurmountable. We have been successful, as I said, in the dissemination process. And let's not forget that it's always an ongoing process improvement type situation. We're never fully satisfied with any product. We always want to make it better. So that's why we're always seeking feedback from the caregivers who attend our classes. We seek feedback from our program leaders, and we listen to that feedback so that then we can go back and improve the product itself. In 1994, we developed the first Caring for You, Caring for Me program. In 2004, this was the second edition where we revised it. We created the handouts. We created a really process that would be easy for a program leader to pick up and go on the road with. Then we developed our curriculum for program leaders. And now in 2016, we're about to release our second edition revised. We went back to update the data that's in here to make sure that it was current. We made some improvements and some revisions based on the feedback we get back from the field. So probably in the next 6 months or so, our revised version is going to be available. At that point in time, we will provide our revisions to RCI Korea, and they'll be able to revise their Caring for You, Caring for Me manual. So that you're never really done, especially when you're working with evidence-based programs. You're never quite finished because you're always looking for that next step. You're always wanting to be sure that you have the best possible, most current product available. I want to close today by thanking you. Thank you for your interest in caregiving. It's certainly on the horizon. It's certainly becoming an international crisis. It takes a lot of courage to take on an international crisis. I thank you for your willingness to learn about family caregiving. I thank you for your interest in doing something to serve society and to help out those family caregivers as they certainly experience the positive things of caregiving, but also those challenges. You are the future of the field of caregiving. You are the people who will be developing the new evidence-informed and evidence-based programs. You'll be the ones to find the exciting new solutions to the problems that family caregivers face. So I thank you.